From the Lean Enterprise Institute in Boston, this is the WLEI Podcast, where we share stories of people making the world better through lean thinking and practice. For more information about LEI, including how we can help you apply lean thinking, please visit lean.org.
Welcome to the Management Brief. As a quick reminder for our listeners, this month we are exploring problem solving and its relationship to management systems. Today I'm joined by Josh Howell, my colleague at LEI, and by Olivier Larue, president of Ydatum. Since 2000, about 25 years now, Ydatum has helped companies implement their own version of the Toyota production system. They establish operational strategies based on TPS principles and implement those strategies in the operations, as well as training the workforce. Olivier is a former colleague of mine in Toyota. We worked together at TSSC, Toyota Supplier Support Center, in the late 90s, supporting the learning and practical application of TPS in Toyota suppliers and other organizations outside Toyota. Olivier has also written a book, The Toyota Economic System, that will be published in 3 volumes. The first volume, which focuses on the philosophical elements of TPS, is already out. We'll explore Olivier's experience and role establishing and supporting organizations to apply TPS and how problem solving played a key factor in the success of its application. We'll also delve into how problem solving relates to the TPS triangle, which embodies the fundamental philosophy, the technical, and the management.
So thanks for joining me on the WLEI podcast, Olivier. I'd like to start by having you share why you do what you do. What is your personal purpose and your problem to solve?
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mark and Josh, for having me on the WLEI podcast. Well, basically, we have a big challenge, I think, that in many ways, TPS outside of Toyota is seen as an add-on to the mass production system. But as an add-on to the mass production system, it cannot really solve the problem that TPS intends to solve. And in simple terms, it's about reconciling affordability and flexibility of making product for the customer. It's also trying to solve the problem of the mundane requirements of industrial work conflicting with the philosophy of respect for people. And then in economic terms, it's about trying to reconcile economic growth, which is necessary for prosperity, with environmental stewardship. And I'd like to talk a lot about what TPS does in addressing those issues.
Thanks, Olivier. So let's delve a little bit more into who you are, Olivier. Please introduce yourself, a little bit overview of your work, your career, and your experience with TPS or Lean.
Oh, great. Thank you. So I was first exposed to TPS when I was working at NUMMI. I was an operator on the shop floor in body and weld. I needed a job to pay for grad school. That's the best job I could find. So I worked there for a while. But then when I graduated, I took a job in the Silicon Valley, a bit more in line to what I thought I would be able to do. But I was very frustrated because I was unable to replicate many of the things I had lived at NUMMI on the shop floor. And so in 1996, when I was given a chance, the opportunity to work for TSSC, Toyota, the division of Toyota that implements TPS at the supplier sites, I jumped on the opportunity, left California, and joined TSSC. And you're one of the first person I actually met when I got there. You took me to a supplier site.
Yeah, it was great to meet you.
Yes, it's great. So that's essentially my career. And then for the last 25 years, then I've been applying what I've learned at TSSC. TSSC really changed me. It changed the way I see and understand the world of operation. And I would like to think that they changed me for the better.
So, Olivier, this is Josh. I'm curious as we kind of get into your book, maybe you could talk a little bit about what prompted you to write the Toyota Economic System. How would you articulate the purpose for the book that you've written?
Great. So I think that writing the book was a bit anecdotal because at Toyota, we're taught to reflect. So when you conduct an activity, you really look at whether you met your objectives and you reflect on whether you have done well or you could have done well. And so that implies writing things down, writing things down. And I've traveled a lot on airplanes. I mean, every week all over the world for many, many years. And on airplane, there is not much to do other than just write down and reflect. So that's what I did. I started to write the book on airplane rides. And so that's probably what a little bit contributed to that, because after reflecting for so many years, I had some materials. And then also when I was at TSSC, I was always very impressed by my leaders, by my mentors, in their ability to very explicitly talk to the framework of the Toyota production system. And at the time, I was still very confused. I did not have my own framework. And I thought, would it be wonderful to be able to someday have this deep understanding of the logic and the framework. And so that was a motivator. And then as I began to understand TPS more, I began to be frustrated with the compartmentalization of the world of operation. The reality is that if you look at the role of company in the world is to contribute to progress, contribute to economic growth. And we tend to compartmentalize operation management outside of an economic system, when in fact they are very, very linked to me. Because companies' job is really to reconcile offer with demand, but they do it very inefficiently, almost in isolation to an economic model. And so that's all the things prompted me to actually write the book.
So you've given this book, the first in a three-part series, the title, The Toyota Economic System. So you are thinking big with a title like that. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit, help us understand how TPS helps company to tackle big problems where innovation is what's required.
Right. When we think of progress, we often think of products. But the reality is that progress also comes from the method we use to make those products. And if you look at it a bit historically, when we first started to make product, we were pretty good at flexibility, but not very good at affordability. And that's the era of craftsmanship, that started thousands of years ago. We could almost make something to custom to what a customer wanted, but it was very expensive, not available, and not affordable. And then with the birth of the mass production system, we began to produce things in larger quantity and make them more affordable for people. But then flexibility began to be compromised. So what we are looking at now is a big challenge of being able to not only produce customized goods for people, but do it affordably. And the mass production system is not good at that, and craftsmanship is not good at that. So we see a natural progression of the world of economics, of operation almost, to servicing the customer, which wants a customized product affordably right now. And the mass production system is not adequate for that. It's not equipped for that. The mass production system cannot do this. So the problem we're trying to solve right now, actually, I think it's partially been solved if you really look at what TPS offers, is to be able to build a product affordably and very much customized to the desire of the customer, with one without compromising the other.
That's a very good perspective. I'm going to step in here and ask you a little bit about, let's take a step back for a moment where we kind of jumped into some of the basic thinking of TPS, but not everyone in our community is so familiar. How does your book help clarify TPS for the community, do you think?
I think that sometimes we see the Toyota production system as just an add-on to the mass production system, which is not. It's something completely different. And there are three elements that are very important as part of the system. One is philosophical, the other one is technical, and then the other one is managerial. And all three are very necessary to make TPS happen. When we only favor the technique at the expense of the philosophy, or the managerial at the expense of the technique, then oftentimes we see that the system fails. So in the mass production system, it's very difficult to be able to achieve the goal of TPS, which is, in the house of TPS, it's about reconciling or the highest quality, the lowest cost, and the shortest lead time, but not one at the expense of the other. They have to be achieved all three simultaneously. And so I think that once we understand the philosophy, the technique, and the managerial aspect of it, we are better equipped to be able to look at the Toyota production system for what it's intended to do.
So your first book of this series, three-part, focuses on philosophical and I'm glad you started there. So maybe you can tell us a little bit of some of the themes that focus on the philosophical element of TPS.
Yes, yes, I'm releasing the books in that order. We'll talk about it maybe a bit later for a reason. So the first book talks about the philosophy of TPS. And some of the philosophies of TPS are well known, and some of them are not well known and not well lived. For instance, the go-see philosophy, shop floor focus, is fairly well known. But there are other important philosophies that are less understood, especially the philosophy around the notion of efficiency. There are three basic notions of efficiency. The first one is the idea that we have to eliminate waste versus forcing work. So I think the notion of eliminating waste is pretty well understood, but the notion of not forcing work is not as well understood. Essentially, forcing work means producing ahead of demand to achieve economy of scale. And very often in our society, in the mass production system, we're continuing to do this. We're not actually producing according to what the customer wants, but we are doing it ahead to achieve economy of scale. And so although we're trying to reduce waste, we're continuing to add waste because we're continuing the same practices that we've done before, which means large batch manufacturing, large batch of conveyance, so on and so forth. And there are two more notions of efficiency that are very important. The other one is what we call total efficiency versus individual efficiency. And the reality is that respect for people is a well-known philosophy in the Toyota production system, but respect for people cannot be really achieved when we continue to favor the machine as being the most important asset on the shop floor. We have to go after the total efficiency of the system and not just individual asset efficiency if we want to achieve the result that the Toyota production system offers. Another example is true versus apparent efficiency. True efficiency cannot be achieved if as a result of the production system we are creating externalities. So in a mass production system, there are a lot of externalities, negative externalities that are being produced. One of them is debt, unserviceable debt. We can go into more detail about that and the reason as to why, but in the mass production system, the reality is that profit and cash flow conflict. So if profit and cash flow conflict, when you run the operation to make a profit, you have to compromise cash flow. But the reality is that to run a company, you need both. You need money to pay bills on time. Okay, you need money to reinvest, you need a profit, but you also need money to pay bills on time. And so often those companies that cannot reconcile profit and cash flow go and incur debt. And very often those debt are not serviceable. I mean, we've seen it in the history on a big scale, 2008. But every day there are companies that fail, startups that fail because they are not able to service their debt, pay their bills. There are also other externalities like pollution or poor labor relation. So the philosophy of the Toyota production system is that we must achieve true result, true benefit in totality, not just for the company to make a better profit or for the customer, but for the worker and for society at large. And so let me finish by saying this, there is a Nobel Prize winner physicist, Richard Feynman. I don't know if you know who he is, but basically he said something very important. He said that science tells us what is, but science doesn't tell us what ought to be. So just applying science for the sake of progress maybe will not get us to the right place. So I think that the philosophical element of TPS is extremely important to guide the technique and to guide the managerial aspect of TPS. Maybe a long answer, not sure if it's...
That was a pretty extensive answer. Very good, though. I just want to delve a little bit deeper into this because I have the same qualms as you do with extreme focus on profits as a primary driver of business. And of course, companies need to have profit to stay in business. But how does TPS help an organization? And the philosophy of TPS help an organization to move a little bit away from that thinking?
I think that the philosophy of TPS helps move away from the quarter-to-quarter philosophy of basically compromising long-term benefits for short-term results. When we look at there are some things that are very difficult to solve. For instance, eliminating changeover on the shop floor. That is not an easy thing to change and to achieve. And it's not going to happen over a quarter. Maybe your company invested into a very expensive piece of equipment. They pay, $5-6 million for it. and it doesn't come with quick changeover, and therefore you will be stuck having a large size of production that will compromise your lead time, which will compromise your cash flow because you have to have inventory to support it, right? This is all the logic, the technical logic behind it, right? And so it's not something that can be done overnight. Fortunately, many of the consultants maybe that are out there teaching TPS have told companies that they can be lean or be TPS-like within a few months, but that's not possible. It takes a long time. So a company who wants to be lean, to have TPS, to the production system, has to take a long range approach to changing not only its culture, but also changing the way the product is designed and the equipment is organized or even designed so that there is congruency between how the product is designed, the shop floor is organized, and the culture is managed.
Thank you for that great answer.
You're
Appreciate that. So just real quickly, we're talking about your book that's come out, the philosophical element.
Yeah.
There are two other elements in your upcoming books, and we'll probably have you back on to talk about them, I'm sure, once those books come out.
Okay.
But maybe you can just briefly, for our audience, mention what they're about.
Well, so the second book is going to be pretty technical. And the reason those books come into that sequence, the first one, so the books are reflecting the elements of the Toyota production system, which are the philosophy, the technical element, and the managerial element. And I wanted to publish them in that sequence because, again, too often we jump into the technical or even jump into the managerial without understanding the guiding principles behind TPS. So the second book will be technical. It will basically really explain the relationship between the elements of JIDOKA and just-in-time and how they work as a system, again, as opposed to individual tools applied a little bit, I wouldn't say necessarily randomly, but maybe a bit haphazardly, okay? And then the third book will be talking more about the managerial approach. And the reason I wanted to publish them in that sequence is because sometimes we ask people to do the impossible. We see companies asking people to reduce lead time in a large batch environment. It's not possible. We see managers asking people to find defects in a large pile of inventory. Well, that's very hard. Okay.
Mm.
We ask managers to have respect for people, but yet the machine is the most important asset. So I think that we have to understand the guiding principles. We have to know how to do it if we are to be successful at allowing people to be good at implementing TPS. So in other words, the managerial, it doesn't have to come last, but I do think it goes a long way. When I went to Toyota, when I went to TSSC, this is the way I learned it, right? They didn't throw me on the shop floor, or they didn't basically give me a course on the technical aspect of TPS. First of all, they really exposed me to the philosophy of TPS. And then after that, they asked me to experience it on the shop floor and apply the principle and develop my technical abilities. And then thirdly, once I was pretty good at that, they asked me to mentor others, not the way around.
So let's move on a little bit. In your book, you ask and answer the question, if TPS is so good, why hasn't it been adopted more widely? Maybe you can share your thoughts a little bit.
First of all, TPS is very good. I think it's proven. It is implemented, but not to the depth to which it could be on the surface. And, companies will always take the easiest path. When you apply TPS, even pieces of it, you can definitely get some results, some short-term results in terms of utilization, stability, labor efficiency, those kind of things. And so companies tend to take pieces of it and apply it a little bit more superficially and not get all the results they could get, but they'd still get some results. So that's one of the reasons we are able to actually get some financial benefit for the company without going into all of the benefits of TPS. And that limits its implementation. And the other thing that is important to understand is that those benefits that are that we're gaining from TPS at the moment are mostly for the firm. Mostly for the firms in terms of reducing costs and increasing profit. It doesn't extend to benefits for everyone. It doesn't extend to benefits for the customer. Because the reality is that many companies are unable today to reduce costs without compromising product quality. They don't know how. And very often we see compromises in the product quality. They also not very much able to benefit the workers. We are continuing to see a less than desirable level of labor relation that is sometimes compromised, right? And then finally, we continue to see a level of environmental pollution that is not acceptable. And so when you look at Toyota and what Toyota does, it doesn't just do TPS for the sake of making a greater profit. It does TPS for the customer to give a better product. It does TPS for the worker to provide a better work environment, to provide the development. And it does TPS for the betterment of society, especially when it comes to pollution. I mean, the hybrid car is obvious, right?
That's great. Thank you. Next question, we've kind of covered this a little bit, so maybe we can just be brief here. But in your book, you introduce two important frameworks that are represented by graphics.
Yes.
One is the TPS house. I think many people are familiar with it. If you're still listening and you're interested in the Toyota production system, you've probably seen the TPS house. The other one that you've already talked a bit about is the triangle,
Yes.
which is TPS kind of forms a triangle. So I don't know if there's anything additional you want to talk a little bit about that component, but I think that's pretty new to probably a lot of listeners.
Yeah, so I think that the house of TPS is one image that has been built, but it embodies the technical aspect, it embodies the philosophical aspect and the managerial aspect. Let me give you maybe some example of that. If you just look at the roof of the house, which is the highest quality, lowest cost, shortest least time, there is a strong philosophical component of it, there is a strong technical component of it, and there is a managerial component of it. So when you look at the philosophical component of it, is the notion of total efficiency, that you cannot favor one at the expense of the other. You cannot favor quality at the expense of cost and cost at the expense of lead time, because the reality is that you need all three to be successful. Cost and quality makes a profit. You cannot sell a product that's not quality, that doesn't have quality. You need lower cost to make a profit. So revenue minus cost equal profit. And then cash flow is important to pay your bills on time. So it's a philosophical notion of total efficiency. But it's also embodying the technical aspect of it, because the reality is that you need to know how to reconcile profit and cash flow without technically. And it's about, it's at a high level, creating stability, eliminating changeover, all the way down to essentially producing one by one on the shop floor according to the desire of the customer. And it's also a managerial aspect of it, because every day in the organization, you have to continue to motivate people toward this image of the ideal by developing their skills and also developing teamwork. So in the house of TPS itself, the philosophy, the technique, and the managerial are embedded, but they're not explicitly made. So I think that, I don't know why Toyota made this triangle. I didn't invent it. I did not invent it. I actually invented nothing. I am still trying to learn everything. But I think that it's probably just a bird eye view at a high level of what the house of TPS embodies.
So maybe you could elaborate a little bit in the center of that TPS triangle with the three sides: the philosophical side, the managerial side, the technical side. We see people. We see that all of this is sort of for the benefit of people, for people development. So could you talk a little bit about sort of that aspect of this as it relates to that framework, that triangle framework for TPS?
Yes, great question. So at the center of TPS is human development, and I think it's for two reasons. First of all, only people can solve problems, at least for now. Maybe AI is going to catch up pretty quickly, but at the end of the day, the level of creativity that is required, I was actually just reading something on AI in regards to mathematics. AI is not innovative or creative enough yet to solve some very complex problem. So anyways, only people solve problems. And second, we have to solve human problems. So That's very important. If we're not solving human problems, then why are we solving them? So at the center of TPS is very much people focused. Actually, on the first book that came out, I think it was written on the title, TPS is economically humanitarian. TPS at the end of the day is trying to solve a human problem using people through the human creativity and the human intelligence. And we cannot lose focus of that. Because if we lose focus of that, as the philosopher says, we may discover things, but not exactly how to apply them, or maybe applying them wrongly.
So how would you say that focus on human development, solving human problems, sort of relates then or ties in with this overall fundamental philosophy for TPS?
Well, we have problems to solve. And those problems have to be solved in the context of what's good for mankind. The book essentially talks about three big problems that we have, one of which is the mass production not being able to reconcile or to cannot create congruency between profit and cash flow. And because we cannot create congruency between profit and cash flow, instead of getting cash from operation, we get it from debt. And those debts sometimes end up being unserviceable, which is a big burden for society. The second so TPS offers a very simple solution. Simple solution, I wouldn't say simple necessarily because it's pretty complex, but a pathway that is known and understood. A pathway that is known to understood. Now, within that pathway, we still have to solve big problems because not all companies have the same equipment. Reducing change over time, for instance, on a piece of equipment may require a different level of problem solving. Okay, or creating a product that has congruency between how the product is designed and its manufacturability may require some important problems to solve. So it's not a simple problem, but it's a pathway to solving those problems. So there's a financial problem, there's a human relation problem, a labor relation problem. The dignity of work is an important part of being able to solve problem. People are not happy at work. They will not give you everything they have. So Toyota production system try to reconcile the creative nature of people, because by nature we are creative, we are problem solvers, but manufacturing and operation is not necessarily very exciting. It can be actually very mundane. So how do you create an environment where you reconcile the creative nature of people with the mundane requirements of industrial work? Which without reconciling those two, you cannot speak of respect for people and you cannot restore the dignity of work in the workplace. And then the last one, very much explored in the book, is the idea that we cannot create progress at the expense of what's good for mankind. The level of pollution that we're creating in operation management today is unsustainable, and we have to address it.
I mean, I love how you're speaking to just that at the core of that TPS or that lean philosophy being humankind, all humankind, right?
Yes.
The ownership who's so concerned about profits, the customer who of course has problems to solve and hopefully is leveraging your products and services in order to solve their problems. And then the people who are doing the value creating work and overseeing that, right? The employees, the workers, the managers. To me, just the generosity found in the philosophy of TPS, and also sort of the greediness. It's greedy on behalf of all.
It's greedy on behalf of all. That's a great way to say it. I like it.
All right. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, we are talking this month. One of the themes of the management brief is about problem solving and its relationship to management systems. So, and obviously it's fundamental to the Toyota production system, problem solving. So how do you feel problem solving links to TPS? What's its primary role?
Problem solving linking to TPS. Basically, TPS is a solution which requires solving problems, essentially. And the way I would say it is that the idea that you can settle for a trade-off, right, is not solving the problem, because a trade-off implies benefit for some and lack of benefit for others. So it generates waste by itself. If somebody is not benefiting, then there is a waste. And so we must go after eliminating the trade-off, the compromise, the idea that we have to optimize, that there is a trade-off that we have to settle for. And so the objective of TPS is to solve the problem. Some of those problems, the pathway is known, but as progress is being made, we have to be very creative in the way we apply that framework. Not everybody makes the same product, not everybody has the same processes, not the same externalities are created by all the different aspects of a company doing an activity. But it does require that we solve those contradictions, those trade-offs, and those externalities.
I think you're what's the terminology? You're preaching to the choir, so to speak.
Okay.
I mean, no, I fully agree with you in terms of the concept of
Yeah,
we have to start with what's the purpose and the organizational problem to solve, and not start with how do I do TPS.
that's correct.
It's TPS is a facilitator, a way to help you solve those problems, and you're speaking in a broad sense too of those problems around people, problems around the environment, and it can be an excellent methodology for that. I also you reminded me of our days at TSSC because I remember our mission, and I'm not going to quote this really well, but TSSC's mission at the time was to support others to implement their version of the Toyota production system.
Yes.
So, which, of course, there's fundamental principles you've been talking about in the last 30 minutes. I mean, and we can't veer from those because those are critical to how, what the Toyota production system is. But each organization will find a methodology to utilize TPS effectively. And just as Toyota did, Toyota didn't just come all of a sudden Taiichi Ohno invented TPS. It came out of a business need and a struggle.
That's right. That's right. Business need. That's correct.
So one part of your book I really liked was just because it rang true for me too, with my experience at TSSC is on pages 72 and 73, you share an example of a Kaizen activity you did at a company in Chicago while you were there at TSSC and the learning you got from failed problem solving and how that relates to the philosophy of customer first thinking in TPS. Maybe you could share some of that learning from that.
So the first learning was really that it's better to eliminate the source of the problem, not make how to deal with it more efficiently. But I think one of the things that we see in companies is that people tend to gravitate towards solving the problem that they know how to solve. And in that case, we did not know how to solve the problem that we had that week. And so we gravitated towards solving what we knew how to solve, which was the wrong problem. Okay. And the reason that sometimes companies are not very good at solving the problem and even the right problem is because it's not always safe to fail solving a problem in a company. So I think that one of the biggest learning that I've learned there is that Toyota was willing to invest in us. We were a team of people learning in not only how to solve the problem, but having the courage to solve the right problem and showing us that if we were to go after solving the problem we did not know how to solve, they would be there to help us and they would have our back. And so I think it's very important for companies to realize that if they don't provide an environment where it's safe to solve problems, two things are going to happen. Problems are not going to get solved, or if some problem gets solved, they'll be the wrong one because it's only the problem that people feel comfortable solving because they know they can. But the reality is that TPS is trying to solve very complex, very difficult problems. They provide a pathway which makes it easier, but some of the problems are still very difficult to solve. And we have to have the courage. And as management, as leaders, you have to be able to encourage the people to solve difficult problems without fear of having negative consequences if they fail to.
Olivier, so I think we can all agree from our experiences that organizations really struggle to build this problem-solving capability. In your experience, what would you say is critical to building this capability? I guess maybe considering the philosophical dimension, the technical dimension, the managerial dimension in that TPS triangle. And how is it that you've learned to help organizations with this challenge?
Well, it really depends on the nature of the organization. I don't think there is a one fits all, but there are some characteristics that are important we can talk about. I think the presence of a framework is very important. A framework that talks to the why and the how. the why we solve the kind of problem we need to solve must be very embedded into the mission of the organization. For instance, eliminating waste. So people must be very clear as to why they need to solve the problem. Second, the how must be uh, widely present, either if it's tacitly or explicitly, into the leader's behavior. I give an example when I was at NUMI that was very interesting in my first book. I think it's in the first book, where I was hoarding parts on the assembly line just in case there was a problem. And my team leader came by and said, "Why do you have parts here doing just sitting?" And although he couldn't clearly express the problem, he knew he was wrong. He was living it and he was role modeling it. So it's very important for the leaders to be very clear on the mission of the why and also very clear on the how. My leaders at TSSC, they had very strong clarity of how they could guide me through learning and applying TPS. Okay. And then a couple of other things that are important is that in most companies, we don't discover problems until they are big. And so the reality is that big problems are hard to solve. And so we need to be able to deploy, uh, and that's where the technique is very important, right? We have to understand that, where we have to be able to deploy the means by which problems are visible very early, so we can tackle them when they are small. And we must also be able to understand a little bit more clearly why the problem happened. And this is where things like standardized work are very important, because when the work is done haphazardly, you don't know what happened. It's very difficult to investigate. All the evidence are done. You have to make many hypotheses as to why it happened. Problem solving has become very complex. So the idea that, so we have to have, to summary here, clear vision of why, strong technical know-how, but also make sure that problems are visible very early and traceable so that we can make it easy to solve them. So some of those are very important. And then, as we talked about earlier, we must make it a safe environment. So those are basically general elements of what needs to happen, but every company is different. And so I would refrain necessarily from applying a model or applying a template, but really understanding what are the problems of the company and how to go about solving them.
Yeah. So presumably, the people that are listening to this conversation are not just getting started or about to get started with Lean or TPS. Presumably, they're sort of along their path, so to speak. But that may not be true. There may be some people that are just getting started, and even if they're not, they've got colleagues that they'd like to get started along this path. So maybe thinking about business leaders specifically, Olivier, what advice could you offer to somebody who's just getting started or preparing to get started with Lean or TPS?
Well, it's hard to find a company today or employees that have not gone through some kind of a program and some kind of a program that has failed. So there are a lot of disenchanted people out there. And so I think the very important question here is, why do you want to start TPS in the first place, right? What problem are you trying to solve, like Mark said earlier? And then really understanding there was a failure of implementing this version of a program. Why did it fail? Really reflecting, starting with the reflection of why things failed. And then based on all of that, maybe refrain to be too overzealous about a huge kickoff. I think it's better to start humble through a pilot and test and understand, and then evaluate the result and then progress from there. Companies have a tendency to confuse marketing and branding of a program with really how to learn actually how to do it. So it is sometimes kind of put the cart before the horse. Learn what you're faced with, and then once you have some success, maybe publicize it a little bit more. But be careful how you get started, because there's a lot of disenchantment out there about different programs, and TPS Lean can be part of it.
Yeah, no doubt.
Olivier, we're kind of getting to the point we're kind of wrapping things up.
Okay.
Thanks so much for being with us today. You've shared a ton of good information, but I kind of want to ask a little more personal question of you. I mean, you've been on this journey for quite a long time. You have an organization that's helping a lot of companies. What's energizing you these days? What's exciting? Can you share any interesting new work or challenges that you're taking on?
Well, I still have to publish the two more books, and so
That's a big challenge.
and the second book is very challenging because it's very technical and it's very easy to make mistakes and little errors, and it's a concern of mine. I don't think I was meant to write books necessarily, but I do think that we can't afford not to share the benefit that what of TPS and what they can bring to society at large. Okay. So that's a different big task and big motivator. And then I continue to work with clients and especially with the people in the companies in transferring the knowledge. What I've learned at Toyota and what Toyota provided to me is invaluable, and it really changed the path of my career and frankly what I care about. And I think continue to transfer that knowledge to others, new younger generations is very exciting.
Great. Well, it was really great having you on with us today, Olivier. We'll be sure to share this with our audience, and maybe you can just for everyone's as a closeout here, for how can people get your book?
Or they can go to Amazon and click
Okay.
and type the Toyota economic system,
Okay.
or maybe type my name, Olivier Larue, and they can get the book. And then I think the second book, I'm working in parallel with a couple of translations. One of them is French, and so hopefully the next book will come out in a month, maybe less, and then the third book on managerial after that.
Great. All right. Thank you very much for being with us. And Josh, thanks for your support here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Great conversation.
Great, thank you.